another foundation, by great coincidence, to be our speaker. This is Steve Holden. He is the, they call you the chairperson, I think?
They call me the chairman.
Chairman, very good. This is the chairman of the Python Software Foundation, that I believe, among other things, I mean, holds the copyright to the source code, is the custodian of Clone the Language. Python the language.
Yep.
And so this is the chairman himself, here to talk to us about, what was the talk we gave? What was the title we gave the talk? My screensaver's on. The, on the theme of it being like a State of the Union address, since we had here tonight the head of the Python Foundation, I thought I would ask for a talk on the state of Python and the Python community. So I know he'll have interesting things to say. Welcome to Steve Holden. And do you need help with the...
I don't believe so. Let me just see. Not yet seen monitor 2, unfortunately. So good. Right, so now if I tell it to go back to 1. Okay, so what we need to do then is press that button once. Excellent. And then get rid of that. Get rid of that. Set up my slideshow. So I'm using the presenter view. And if I now hit F5, okay, you'd think I'd done this before, wouldn't you? Okay, so a talk on the state of the Python community. The subtitle actually isn't really terribly meaningful, except insofar as it's a reminder to me that a minor purpose of tonight's talk is to head towards a talk I want to give at PyCon this year. So, for those of you who don't know me, which I guess is most of you, I run my own company, Holden Web LLC, and it's not a big company, there's just me in it. I wrote a book called Python Web Programming a long time ago now, so could you find me any water, do you think, by the way? Thank you. I wrote Python Web Programming 7 years ago now, so it's a completely out-of-date book. I think it was based on Python 2.2. Ah, right. If anyone does have a copy, I will be happy to sign it. My usual rubric is purchase is the sincerest form of flattery. And someone paid the compliment at the last PyCon of saying that for a 6-year-old book, it was still awfully up to date on a lot of the non-Python matters, because I tried to include a lot of the web technology stuff as well. So I am the chairman of the Python Software Foundation, and something that made me really happy, 2 days before Christmas, I was informed that I'd been elected a fellow of the British Computer Society. So some credentials, I suppose. The reason for the dry mouth, by the way, is not because I've been smoking dope before the meeting. I've actually had rather a challenging week this week. I'm down in Atlanta to teach a course on, I shudder to confess, Microsoft SharePoint. Hey, we all have to earn a living, right? So I'm teaching this class on Microsoft SharePoint, and the first day is Tuesday. And, well, I won't tell you the exact circumstances. I will merely leave it to your imagination and say, A, it's the only time I've had to leave the classroom 3 times at short notice. And B, it's the only time I've been obliged to change my shirt once before returning to the classroom. So I have been a little unwell, and I hope you'll bear with me. But as far as tonight's goals go, I was asked, among other things, to point people at some information sources about Python. So I'm going to do that. A lot of those will probably be relatively obvious. I was asked if I would try to give you some idea of what the Python community is and maybe suggest ways in which you might like to. Thank you very much. connect with it. And to highlight some of the activities that the community is undergoing. And I also want to try to encourage you to participate in Python community activities to a greater degree if I can. And as I say, there is the minor ambition that I'd like to rehearse some of the ideas that I want to present to the larger community when we all come together towards the end of March in Chicago for PyCon 2009. So first of all then, we can talk about the information sources. And you'll see, by the way, that this Help Wanted sticker comes up from time to time on various slides where there are things that perhaps some enterprising member of the community could find a place doing if they wanted to help out. So python.org, the website, is clearly the first place to go for sources of Python information. And it would be foolish to ignore that, although the website does have, I think, some role to play in ensuring its own improvement. I mean, things have improved, and I'll talk about the website briefly later. comp.lang.python, can I ask a question? Who is a subscriber to either Python list or the comp.lang.python newsgroup? Quick show of hands. Now, you see, this always astonishes me. We've got a room full of people with allegedly, ostensibly, some interest in Python. And is it that you just don't know about this information source, or simply that you don't think there's anything valuable to be learned from it? Hands up who knew about the existence of this mailing list
You can
group.
access it through the web.
I'm sorry?
You can access it through the web.
Well, yeah, okay, but I mean, you can access it as a Google News group, you can access it on Main. I was asking if you accessed the resource. I mean, I don't care how you do it.
I think it would be overkill to receive 100 emails every day.
I wouldn't normally access it as a mailing list. It's a bit high volume for that.
Okay.
Point there?
I was just going to say it's incredibly informative and also it's entertaining, especially whenever I see your name attached to a post. I always have to read those. Those are always usually quite good.
Thank you. I'll have to try and collect them in a book if they're worth it. But yeah, I mean, anyway, it's there, and it is a source of information. And even if you don't want to subscribe to it, it's one of those lists which is very, very helpful. So if you have a problem and you post a question, you're almost certain to get a decent reply. And even newbies are likely to get a reply which doesn't involve burning in hell because you didn't read the manual first, as certain other news groups have possibly been known to suggest. So docs.python.org, of course, now we've got Python 2.6 and Python 3.0 both going at the same time. So there is docs.python.org/version as well. If you go to docs.python.org, you'll get the 2.6 documentation, because we don't feel it's appropriate yet to promote 3.0 as the first version that anybody should learn, although experience teaches us that there are people coming along and they see 2.6 and 3.0 and they say, oh, well, I'll start with 3.0 then. And then they're a bit disappointed when they find that half the libraries that they want to use haven't been ported yet. But I do feel as well that the documentation that documents Python, the organization is, shall we say, less than optimal for finding what you want sometimes. You have to look in the oddest places to find things. Georg Brandl did a terrific job on reorganizing it in terms of the production mechanism. When I first started working with Python, to work on the documentation seriously, you had to involve a tool chain which involved Perl scripts, tech, DVI, and heaven knows what else. And I mean, it did a good job, but nowadays you can write in restructured text, and the restructured text will be processed by a Python utility, and you do get much better looking documentation. But unfortunately, it still needs reorganization. So if you do see comp.lang.python, you will probably see the weekly Python URL posted. It's always worth looking in the footers. I actually checked yesterday. Some of the links are now broken, but there are an enormous number of useful sources of information linked from every Python URL post, so it's worth learning about that. Two RSS feeds that I am never without, Planet Python and unofficial Planet Python, will give you a lot of information about what's going on in the Python world. So lots lots of Python-related blogs appear there, for example. The Python dev list, or Complang Python dev as it also appears, is a great place to go to ask questions, but only about the development of Python, please, and not about how to use Python for applications, because that's, I mean, it's not anywhere near as high volume a list as Complang Python, but they do like to focus just on the development. So if it's a non-development question, then you will probably be politely asked to go to Complang Python. If you want to know what people are tagging on Delicious, that's how to find out. And in fact, I have a little script that runs every 15 minutes on my server in the basement that looks at my own particular Delicious feed. And there are 7 items on the front page of holdenweb.com tagged Python news. That's just the latest 7 Delicious things that I've tagged with the Python tag on Delicious. But that will keep you give you a much larger context, because that's what everybody's tagging about Python. And of course, it's also good to keep in touch with what's going on excuse me, in the Python package index, which is in itself quite a job. I followed PyPy for about 3 months, and I seem to remember in that 3 months I clocked just under 1,000 items going through the feed. So there is a lot happening there, but PyPy is a great place to look for inspiration and things to do with Python. There are a lot of great Python books as well as Python web programming, and I'm not going to recommend any one particular one except for Frederick Lunt's book on the Python library, which is available electronically. But there are some terrific books now on Python, and the Python literature, the corpus that's available to us, has improved enormously. I will single out one particular source of information, which is Doug Hellman's Python Module of the Week blog, which for me personally has been very instructive, and it's amazing the way Doug keeps those articles coming. I mean, I just write one article a month for Python magazine, and Doug is basically putting the magazine together and writing 4 or 5 Module of the Week articles a month, so he's clearly a busy guy. Do you have a day job at all, Doug?
Yeah, I do have a full-time job.
Okay, so Python magazine, I think, is actually starting to show some promise. I mean, you know, anything in its first year is bound to be a little maybe disorganized or lacking its full sense of direction. But I think it's probably going to be successful enough in the next year or two that it's likely to attract competition. So, I mean, that's all I really wanted to say. I didn't suggest that the sources would be anything more than obvious, but I hope I've given you a few ideas about where to find Python information. But I also wanted to pick your brains as to what other sources of information you'd come across, because I'm quite prepared to add those to the talk. So if anybody's got any suggestions, now would be a good time to let me have them.
There's a wiki out there that I believe I just discovered recently, and I apologize, I don't remember the URL of what it was associated with.
But it's not wiki.python.org?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
It could have been, but it might have been somewhere else.
Okay, right. Well, a wiki. I'll Google that.
I will make an effort to find out.
Thank you very much. Do you have my email address, or do you know how to reach me?
I bet I can figure it out.
No, I'm sure you would. I'm normally on the first page. If you know my name, you can usually find me through Google. Yeah.
I know I have that.
Okay, thanks. Anything else?
Gerard Flanagan has put together a collection of a bunch of the Python books that are available online called The Hazel Tree. It's thehazeltree.org.
Okay.
And that includes Dive into Python.
That's probably the greatest book on Python.
Okay, yes, I've actually used Dive into Python as a teaching text. It's a great book. Okay.
I don't know what the status of that is, but I know that
Is this
it's
book
in process.
current?
What, Dive into Python? It's available both in print and electronically.
Yeah, but does it include like latest thing from Python, like generation
I
expressions,
think
all
he's
this?
I think he's probably up to about 2.4 with that at the moment. It's not radically recent.
This is absolutely the
It's not
nicest
radically
book I've
recent.
read.
But, you know, I mean, the nice thing about Python is that the language design has been consistent enough that you don't really need to worry too much about that. You can still get good value from an old Python book.
But this book had like, it was, I guess it was cutting edge when it was written.
It
Kind
was
of
pretty
really
cutting edge,
bypasses
I think,
what
and it
you-
was updated a couple of times as well. Yeah, but it's not fully up to date now.
Which is
Oh, by the way, does anyone get the what is it, Python 411, Ron Stevens podcast? That appears on the feed sometime. Ron, I can't remember the URL, but Ron also maintains a website with quite a lot of Python resources in there.
I like freshmeat.net. It has a lot of Python.
Okay. Well, yeah, that's something I pay attention to occasionally, but I don't look at regular feeds.
Yeah, I
but
look
that's
at it.
worth
I look
knowing.
at it every day.
Can you filter they've got an RSS feed presumably. Can you filter it by language
I
tag?
haven't tried. I just because I find it interesting just to see everything that's going on.
So you just watch it all.
Yeah, I just look at it. I just
Yeah.
pull it up once a day and read through the summaries,
Okay.
and then I found a lot of new stuff that I didn't realize existed.
Cool. Excellent. Well, thank you. That's some good suggestions.
Freshmeat.what?
Net.
Freshmeat.net. There's someone bringing it up on his mobile as we speak. Okay, well, if you have any other suggestions, please do mail me. But now let's move on and talk, if we can, about the Python community and who is the Python community. I mean, I've been asked to talk about the Python community because I'm the chair of the Python Software Foundation, but when you look at the Python Software Foundation, it's actually a tiny organization in worldwide terms. I mean, if you put all the members of the Python Software Foundation in one room, it would represent less than 1/10 of the attendance at the last PyCon US in Chicago. So I don't really feel that the PSF per se, as it's currently organized and constituted, can claim to represent the Python community. So when we talk about the Python community, I tend to think more about just everyone who uses Python, not just members of the PSF. And so I don't regard my obligations as being principally to the members of the PSF. I regard my obligations as being primarily to the Python language, the intellectual property that represents the Python language. And that's basically because I see that as an extension of a duty that the foundation has to everyone that uses Python. So really, as far as I'm concerned, the Python community is collected together, everybody who wants to be a member of the Python community, as long as they'll stick with whatever rules we have, which basically we don't really have many rules anyway, so that's not going to be terribly tedious. I mean, the foundation has bylaws, which we've just gone through a certain amount of pain to try and revise, and we'll be putting those revisions to the members shortly. But, the community is not really a thing with rules. So basically, you're the Python community, which is one of the reasons why I was delighted when Brandon accepted my offer to come and speak tonight. This was something that happened fairly impromptu. I only, it suddenly twigged last Friday. Well, you're going to Atlanta. Why don't you get in touch with the guys who run the Atlanta group? Maybe they'd like to hear from you. So I would like to give you accurate figures about Python usage, but nobody really knows how many people are using Python. You can get some information about what people are doing with it, but in terms of how many there are, nobody really knows. I gave a talk at OSCON 4 years ago, and I met someone from Industrial Light and Magic, and at that time, they had somewhere between 700 and 800 Python programmers, so possibly the largest concentration of Pythonicity in one particular location. But I think one thing we can agree on is that Python usage is growing. Even though maybe the percentage of searches is going down. I mean, I jocularly wanted to suggest, although I don't really think it's true, that the search ratio is going down because people know where to find information about Python. But I suspect it is simply that the community, the Google user community, is now far less dominated by the techies than it used to be. So this means there's going to be a lot of these people along. And so I am particularly concerned that the Python community remains welcoming to people who want to come along and join it. I think that's effectively, for any community, it's lifeblood. If you become exclusive, if you become a clique of any kind, then effectively you're not going to survive long term. So I thought to myself, well, okay, what happens if you're interested in Python? What kind of impression do you get of Python from the web? So if you go to python.org, of course, then you'll see this website here, and I hope you're all familiar with that front page. And it's I suppose the best thing I can think of to say about the website at the moment is it's worthwhile, it's worthy, it's well designed, it's not going to offend anybody. Of course, if you go to python.com, you'll get a slightly different experience, and one which definitely had to be cut off at the bottom of the slide. So I'm not like, I mean, that's basically a continual thorn in our side, and we do occasionally in the foundation ask ourselves, you know, is there something we could do to stop those people using that domain name? But I don't really think there is, so we're just going to have to put up with that and never utter the .com top-level domain in relation to our domain name. But none of that, you know, is really the website. Nobody's going to look at the python.org website and say, "My God, I've got to get some of this stuff." So maybe python.com have got something going. I don't know. You know, maybe they do have the right idea. Although I don't really think Naked Geeks is going to attract anybody to Python. You know, the more fully clothed we all stay, then probably the better the growth in the community will be. But the problem is, I saw a talk by Kathy Sierra. I don't know whether you've ever heard of her. She's this person who goes around giving inspirational tech talks. And she was talking about some company whose name I can't even remember now, but she said one of their principles was, you know, that the user must be able to do something really cool in the first 30 minutes of using the product. And I thought, well, wouldn't that be great? So, you know, clearly the reason Python users don't feel that way is because you can't do anything cool with Python, can you? Well, we know that's not true. You can do hugely cool things with Python. So why don't you, or why isn't there a monster distribution that includes all these cool things as demonstrations so that people can just download it and say, hey, look, what I just downloaded from the web, and be doing really cool things within 30 minutes. So here's a Python application running on a Nokia telephone. I mean, it's not a terribly great application, it's just having the phone read the accelerometer to act as a spirit level. My G1 phone does the same thing, but sadly that's programmed in Java. Python, of course, is an available language on the Nokia network tablet platform. I think in that particular case we're probably just showing some Python application, but I was amazed. You might have heard I ran a sprint in Iceland about 3 years ago, and every participant of the sprint was given a Nokia 700 tablet as an appreciation of gratitude. And I think it was less than 3 hours later, Richard Jones had got the Python interpreter running, and he'd uploaded Pygame, and he'd actually got a little game running on the Python tablet. So you can do hugely cool things. I mean, even when you look at Python's rendering abilities, you know, the ability to do that sort of stuff is really quite impressive. And I know that scientists find Python exceptionally useful, but one of my customers, CCP Games, of course, use Python extensively in environments where you don't normally think of Python being run. And by no means all their code is in Python, but a lot of it is, even though they've got this fabulous three-dimensional display system, which is hugely interactive and allows you to, you know, do shoot-'em-up-in-space games. And that's all done, you know, a lot of that's done in Python. And of course, as I said, lots of good science is being done in Python that's very, very engaging, visually speaking. Somebody that I want to start bringing with me to conferences when I can, is this little chap here. I don't know whether anyone's got one of these. It's just a tux. But basically you plug a USB cable into this little fish's mouth here, because the fish is the radio transmitter. And the tux receives commands from that, so it will speak and it will move its beak and it will open its eyes and it will rotate. So that's all programmed in Python. That's a cool thing that kids can do with Python if we made it a little bit more approachable.
What's the name of this thing?
I can't actually remember the name of it. It's produced by
Tux is Alive.
Tux is Alive. Thank you. Yeah, that's right.
The website is a Plone website that uses Get Paid for checkout. So.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Chris. Cool. So anyone ever played Galcon? Galcon's written in Python. That's a very engaging game, written by Phil forgotten his second name.
Cassie.
Yes, right, Phil Hassey. And then, of course, there are lots and lots of Django applications. Chicago Crime was probably the first gripping Django application until somebody suddenly realized that people were using it to find out where they could score drugs in Chicago. But nevertheless, it was a very original idea. And it, you know, this, all I'm trying to demonstrate is that the only thing that's missing in Python is people enthusing about it, effectively. You know, we all kind of sit here in our self-effacing, smug way, knowing that hugely cool things can be done in Python, but we don't grab people by the collars and tell them about it. So, you know, if Python's so cool, the obvious question is, why is the website so lame? Well, we have done something about that, right? This is how the website looked in January 2006. I went to the Wayback Machine and I actually grabbed a copy of the page. Unfortunately, that's how it looked in April 2006. So you can see that not a lot has actually changed in the last 3 years, hence the Help Wanted sign. Now, you know, you would think, well, okay, the fact that the website's either difficult to change or hasn't changed must mean that there isn't any good Python web software, right? So no Django, no pylons, no turbo gears, no Plone, no Zope, none of those things. Well, of course there are. We know there are perfectly good pieces of Python web software, and yet the Python community, here you all are sitting on your butts, the Python community cannot get itself together to have a website. You know, I mean, come on, I'm a one-man company, and I've got a website where I can get a news item with a hypertext link onto my front page by making a one-line entry in Delicious, by, you know, just clicking on a menu item in Firefox, and everything gets propagated automatically. Are you telling me that we, the Python community, can't do that for our own representative website? I don't believe it. I don't believe it's true. So, the problem is, of course, that somebody needs to do the work. So what is a newbie, a Python newbie? What do we want them to think? Well, I used this phrase marketing proposition, and I actually smiled as I typed it, because I knew if Guido van Rossum was here, he would be going, because Guido really hates any idea that you know, Python might get involved in marketing or promoting itself somehow, and I'm not really quite sure why. I suspect possibly that he was molested by a marketer at an early age or something like that. But basically, I don't want to promote Python to people so they think Python is cool. I don't even want to promote Python to people so they think that PSF is cool. I want to promote Python to people so they can think that they're cool. And this is actually another idea that I stole from Kathy Sierra. I want to have people who've just picked Python up being amazed at the great things that they can do with Python and enthusiastic about getting other people to join in and do the same things. So, that's a little bit about the community and the way it's presenting itself and what it is at the moment, if you like. But what is it doing? Who's in charge of the Python community? Well, I suppose if you accept that the Python Software Foundation is actually at the head of the Python community, then I suppose I am, in which case all I can say is I'm sorry. I actually joined the Python Software Foundation in 2003 after I was invited to join after I organized the first PyCon, which was when that marked the transition of Python, in my mind anyway, from being something else to being a community-based organization, and we always build PyCon as a community conference. So I joined the board a year later, and I was actually elected chairman last year. Now, the way that, I'm just hoping I don't have to make another sudden exit, the way it works is that the membership elect the board, and then the board elect the chairman. So all that really happened was I said who's going to be chairman, and I looked around and they were all at the other side of the room. So I just wasn't quite as quick off the mark as they were. Now, my colleagues and I on the board are trying to be as open as we can about running running the organization. So, you know, we've got minutes that get published every month and that kind of stuff. But we do find, I've referred things to the members time and time again just to have them say, well, you know, whatever you want to do really, Steve, just get on with it. So often the members just say get on with it. So I've come to the conclusion that maybe some of them, you know, aren't really that bothered in promoting Python. But actually, when you read the mission statement of the Python Software Foundation, it says we're supposed to promote and protect and advance the Python programming language, which is all well and good, and the development community are doing that in an exceptionally worthy way. But it also says we're supposed to support and facilitate the growth of the international community of Python programmers. So I suppose here I'm supporting and facilitating in a certain sense. But, I mean, if you're a newbie, you're not really going to sign up for that. Right? It's like, oh, well, I've got to join this organization because it's got this fabulous mission statement. So a question that I'm asking myself more and more nowadays is, well, how do we build popular support for the language? And you know, should I actually be trying to build popular support? I mean, there was a jocular reference earlier on this evening to, you know, how Python was winning against some other programming language. I don't really regard it as sensible, even sometimes in a jocular fashion, to pretend that we're in any kind of battle for world dominance. I mean, the technology world is growing so fast. It looks like, you know, in much the same way as people who were looking at traffic predictions in the 1850s were predicting that by 1917 we'd all be 18 inches deep in horse shit. So if you look at the predictions today, you know, by the year 2050, probably 75% of the world are going to be computer programmers. Now, that's not as silly as it sounds. In actual fact, Guido's vision of computer programming for everyone is going to be realized, because in the same way that literacy was unavailable to the common herd in, say, the 15th century, you know, this is basically, we're in the 15th century of programming right now. We're the monks, if you like, who have access to the technology. But given that things are developing much faster, in 100 years' time, if you can't program, you will be illiterate. So I think that in actual fact, it does behoove us to try to promote our technologies, just not necessarily at the expense of other technologies. I think Python's too good to need to promote itself against anything else. It can promote itself on its own merits. So, Python conference activities have remained vigorous, I'm happy to say, and I'm delighted to be able to remind you that PyCon is going to be in Atlanta next year.
Is that
I
official?
wanted to tell you exactly where, but unfortunately, our conference advisors are still involved in negotiations with 2 or 3 different venues, but I can tell you it will be at a downtown hotel. So you will be able to get to PyCon by Marta next year if you live anywhere near a station. So we've started to see the appearance of various regional unconferences. PyOhio have had one, the Arkansas group have had one, the Texas group had a PyCamp Texas, and more will doubtless follow. The encouraging thing about that is we've offered financial support to these things, and a couple of them have said, well, either we don't need any support at all because sponsorship paid for it, or we don't need as much sponsorship we don't need as much assistance as we thought. Also, the PyCon scene internationally is very encouraging. Groups in all kinds of different countries have started to call their conferences PyCon as well. So we've got one in Argentina, well, you can read just as easily as I can. And in Europe, it's beginning to look as though EuroPython is probably going to replace PyCon in whichever country it happens to be run that year, because EuroPython is a movable feast. So PyCon attendance in the United States has actually been growing up quite fast. I'm encouraged to say. I suspect that with the economy the way it is, we may not see quite the same exponential level of growth. By the way, if you're wondering what the dip was there, that was when we moved to Dallas, Texas. So quite what that says about people's opinions of the president's adopted home state, I'm not really sure. But yeah, it clearly wasn't as bad as it might have been, because once people had been once, they did go again. So one of the things we've tried to do with the foundation is we've tried to look at helping people by giving them grants, and we offered 3 grants at one stage. One to an SNMP-based development project, which I think I can safely say didn't really come to very much. I'm not actually sure exactly what happened to it. There were some software carpentry lecture notes provided, which have actually become the basis of a number of academic courses. But I think the pride of that particular stable was the fact that we offered a grant to the Jython developer at a time when without that grant, Jython development would probably have ceased. And if Jython development had ceased then, we would not now be in the position where Jython has just released its I think, second beta of 2.5 compatibility. And now, because they're getting commercial support from Sun Microsystems, they're on track to move up to 2.6 and eventually to 3.0. So I think Jython was definitely the star of that effort. But the problem was that it was very, very hard work for the people who had to assess who should get the money. And I mean, you've got various people they realized there was, I think the total came to $48,000. So we got people saying, oh, well, I would like to use the $48,000 for, and various harebrained schemes came out as well. But there were some worthwhile projects proposed, and it was very difficult to decide who to award it. So basically, again, help wanted. We haven't really repeated that exercise because people don't have much stomach for the job of doing the reviews. And if we could distribute the work more effectively, then maybe it would be practical to consider another such scheme. Okay. So, if we're going to grow the Python community, let's assume that we've accepted that growth of the Python community is a good idea. How do we get greater participation, and what are the limits on what the Python community, through the medium of the PSF and otherwise, can do? Well, strangely enough, money's not the problem. You might think for an open source foundation, which is again a 301c, we're a registered charity, you might think that money would be a problem. At the moment it's not. As I stand here, we have, I think, well, certainly over $400,000 in the bank. So funding is not a problem. The real limiting resource is manpower. We haven't got people to do things. And about 2 years ago, I think it was 2 years ago, we had an influx of new membership to the board, and one of the new members, in a fit of enthusiasm, suggested that what we ought to do was to go cap in hand to Google or somebody like that and score a couple of $1 million, because then we would be able to do so much more. And I felt really quite churlish disillusioning this poor individual that wasn't the problem. That really the reason we weren't doing more is because it takes time to do things, and human time is our limiting resource. So unless we've got people to run programs, we can't give grants, we can't run conferences, we can't build the infrastructure that we'd like to build, we can't publish the splendid quality of documentation that I have ambitions for, and everything else. So now you know what the help needed signs have been about. So I do think it's important to try to grow the community, but not with the intention of recruiting them to any abstract goals that the foundation itself is promoting. I think the important thing is to try to recruit, basically, if you want to serve a community, the marketing people have got it right. The first thing we have to do is to find out what they want. So whether it's building a better mousetrap or whatever, we need to look outwards to the community and have them tell us what it is, in their opinion, that will support the growth of Python and the growth of the Python community. We need to encourage people to lead. And once we can actually get people with their bit between the teeth, if you like, then we can support them with the resources. I mean, most of the resources will be money to fund things like travel and equipment. We can give them a certain amount of coaching and mentoring. So basically, you tell us what it is that we need to be doing to enlarge the Python community. So since my election as chairman, I've been trying to I've been thinking really hard about how the foundation can become a more effective agent for change in the Python world. And To that extent, we've now made the experiment of appointing David Guja as full-time chairman of PyCon. You'll know David if you were at PyCon last year, because he chaired the last one as well. So he's given up his full-time job and he's taken the daring step of becoming a contractor to the PSF for 6 months, during which time there'll be the second Chicago PyCon. And hopefully that will mean that the conference will be more effective, it'll be recruiting people more effectively, and so on. Our treasurer has now agreed to spend 500 paid hours per year on the treasury task, so the management of our finances, I hope, will be adequate. And we have recently recruited an administrative assistant who's basically just helping us at the moment catch up on all the really trivial stuff that I could do with half my brain if I only had the time, and so could the other directors. But we don't have the time, and I felt it was important that somebody was available who did have the time. We awarded, you may have heard of the Python Community Awards. I actually made a post on Lang Python about those last night. We made our first award, I think, probably a year ago now, and the certificates are only going out this week. So that's how effective we've been at the grunt jobs. But I really do want the Python Software Foundation to be able to give support to grassroots community initiatives, because you can't grow an organization from the top, because from the top your reach is very limited. So if you want, you can see this meeting tonight as a kind of, by analogy, as an example of the Smurf attack. I don't know whether you're all aware of the Smurf attack. Back in the days when people weren't particularly savvy about networking, if you wanted to mount a Smurf attack against someone, you would ping the broadcast address of a large network, only instead of your own source IP address, you would put your victim's source IP address in the packet. So you would send out this one packet from, let's say you wanted to attack Amazon.com. It would get to the boundary router of your large amplifier network. The boundary router would send this one packet out as a broadcast to the whole network. All of them would see a ping request from Amazon.com, so you send out one packet, and Amazon.com gets 11,500 ping replies that it has no idea why it's received. So this is a bit like a Smurf attack. You know, I'm telling you what I want the Python Software Foundation to be able to do for the Python community. So I've pinged your broadcast router, and now it's up to you to, you know, take some action about all that. So leadership, I have discovered, is difficult. But the strategy, as far as I'm concerned, is not to try to cast hooks and pull people along. It's to try to set a direction which other people will be able to use to support Python and to support the community. So I'm interested in trying to facilitate the community connecting with new members, attracting new members. I'm not trying to push you in a particular direction. I'm trying to explain that we can act as an enabler. If all that's missing is money and you have worthwhile ideas, then we will do our very best, if those ideas are in the interest of the Python language, to try and help them. I want to support community initiatives. Now, it's a sad fact that, unfortunately, open source people aren't necessarily the easiest group in the world to lead. So I've found that basically, you know, I can't lead by pushing, I can't lead by pulling. The best thing I can do, I suppose, is try and lead by example. So I've come to visit you today to explain what I'm trying to do and to recruit your support. Thank you very much. Yes?
What's the view of the foundation, or the internal view about IronPython?
What's the view of the foundation?
Is it all upside, or do you worry about it?
About IronPython. Okay, well, first of all, the foundation doesn't really have a view unless it's recorded in the board's minutes.
Tell the group what IronPython is.
I should tell the group that IronPython is originally IronPython was developed by Jim Huguenin, who was also the original developer of JPython as it originally was, and Jython as it is now. It's a .NET implementation of Python. As far as we're concerned,
But he now works for Microsoft, so
he now works on the Microsoft Common Language Runtime team, yeah. As far as the Python Software Foundation is concerned, as long as it's still Python, we don't care, right? Now, I have had discussions with several people about, what contingency plans we should have in case some third party decides to come along and call something that we don't regard as being Python, Python. And we believe we've covered our asses in that one by trademarking the name Python for use as a programming language. So basically now we have the trademark. We also have a trademarks committee, so if you know anybody who's using the name Python and it's not in line with our guidelines, the Software Foundation, thanks to Stefan Diebel, the previous chairman, actually has guidelines for using the trademark. So if you want to say you wrote a program in Python, you're just using the word to describe the programming language. That's what we call a nominative use. That's perfectly okay. If you want to call your product something Python, then we reserve the right to take exception to that. If Python is coupled with some other stem in another word like IronPython or JPython or something like that, then we want to be able to say, well, hang on, we think there's a legal case for not calling it that. In the case of IronPython at the moment, we don't have a problem because they have actually been extremely supportive towards the language as it's currently defined. They are very, very keen to maintain the utmost level of compatibility that they can with current language definitions, and they are also committed to migrating towards Python 3. So there really is no problem as far as I'm currently concerned.
Even, well, I mean, I guess it's peripherally related, but it's not going to be Python everywhere if they're using their libraries. And programs are using the .NET library.
But when you read the CPython documentation now, it says not available for Unix or not available for Windows or available for Mac. Are we going to say that's not Python either?
No, I don't.
Are you going to say that IronPython should do everything that CPython does, but hey, if you want to use those Microsoft APIs, you can't do that. That wouldn't make it Python. That would clearly not be terribly rational. I mean, I would rather have Jim Huguenin going around with little robots showing everybody in Microsoft what amazing things you can do with Python. I don't want to get into a fight with these people unless they want to try and take control, which at the moment they show no signs of wanting to do. So let's live with them. It's a big world, and fine, if people can do things in IronPython that they can't do in CPython, well, so much the better. Let them use IronPython for that. As long as they're using Python, I'm happy. I see no reason to complain. Yes?
You mentioned how difficult it was to assess the grants that you had made. Have you considered something more open, like small incremental grants, open source bounties, that type of thing?
Have we considered open source bounties or smaller, more incremental methods of financial support? I think the answer is no, we haven't. But again, probably through to lack of time as much as anything else. So, it even takes time to come up with a scheme for how you're going to award the monies in the first place. And okay, we gained a certain amount of experience from the first round, but it cost us a lot of time. So I think probably it's a question of once bitten, twice shy. And I'm sure, if a number of people wanted to get involved with developing some scheme whereby the foundation could usefully, incrementally support development projects of various kinds, I think it would be very likely to get modest support from the board. So it's not anything that I would object to. It's simply that there are only so many hours in the day, and a lot of them have to be spent earning a living. So the PSF is a part-time activity for most people who are involved in it. Yeah.
Is it beyond the scope of foundation to consider what's going on with TK and Tile as a GUI that has in the past been shipped with Python and is actually, in some sense, a separate product from another language?
So what are you asking, whether we should concern ourselves with its development and support that development to maintain the current level of support for TK in Python? Well, I have to say, first of all, I wasn't aware that TK was suffering from any particular problems. Are there specific issues, or?
There's a transition, there's been a transition going on from what was called TK before to an add-on that was called Tile.
Yeah.
And from what I haven't personally tried to program in the newer versions yet, but from what I've read, there's apparently some older functions that are being stripped out that are kind of making people make a choice between doing things the old way or the new way.
Okay, now is Tile Tickle based? TCL based?
I suspect it is, but I'm not sure.
Okay.
And though it's the same thing, something similar I think is happening on the TCL.
I believe the answer is, I mean, from my point of view anyway, don't quote me on this, because this should not be represented as a PSF view.
Okay.
But I suspect it's so far the other side of the line between Python and everything else that I doubt that the directors would feel terribly happy trying to influence those affairs. I mean, that's effectively somebody else's concern. They maintain whatever offers the API, and Python will make use of the API. But obviously, I mean, one of the things I can tell you is that there are two interesting things happening. Before PyCon, you know that we always, well, you maybe not know, but before PyCon we've had for the last 3 or 4 conferences a day of tutorials. That's now expanded to 2 days, but on the first tutorial day there is also a virtual machine summit of some kind where the developers of various different virtual machines are going to get together and discuss common problems. And then on the second tutorial day there's what they're billing as a developers summit, where I think, again, other open source developers are coming in to discuss developments with Python. Now, you know, if people from the Tile community want to join in with that one, the person who needs to know about that is Ivan Kristic, who will be responsible for issuing the invitations. But we are looking more towards the larger community and trying to address issues. The developers, rather than the foundation specifically, are trying to address issues which are common to all of these areas, rather than regarding ourselves as just developing in isolation anymore. So maybe in 5 years' time the position will have changed quite a lot. It's only just starting to right now. Yeah, Chris.
3 things. Two of the questions you brought up I feel like are one, really good questions, but also connected.
Yep.
The last one of how do we connect the Python community? That's a great question. And I don't have any answers to it, but I can definitely say that my experience of the Python community is that it isn't necessarily like a community. It's an amalgamation of these other communities. Like, I'm a part of the Plone community, therefore I'm sort of de facto part of the Python community, but I've never been to a PyCon. I don't necessarily know if...
You bastard! Oh, sorry.
We should go in 2010.
Yeah,
For
sure. Good, excellent.
I mean, you know, part of it is I don't know why I would go. And I think that a little bit comes into a little bit like how do we communicate about the community in general.
Very, very relevant indeed. If you don't know why you could go, why you should go, why would you think of it?
Right. I mean, and especially not as a developer. I mean, that's why I've found a place in the Plone community where as a non-developer I can have a role.
Yep.
And but I kind of had to make that for myself. It wasn't necessarily like somebody, you know, generally the answer is like, oh, you can write documentation.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm not saying that's.
Yes, right, and everyone really likes writing documentation, don't they? Yeah, a wonderful job.
But I think that one's really tied back to one of the first ones, which is how do we build popular support for Python?
Yeah.
And you know, we started our company in Argentina, and so most of my recruiting experience for developers of Python, a lot of what I saw there, I think, is fairly similar here, and I've seen it in Brazil as well. But that's that it's really hard to get Python into like the official learning institutions or the universities. It's like they're always educating on Java.
Yeah.
And then so it's like if you want to learn Python, you have to go out and do it on your own. And so like part of what we were doing was providing sort of like a financial incentive for people to learn, in the sense that we would say, look, if you want to learn these Plone and Python technologies, we have work available through our company.
Okay. Yeah.
But I think if we could get better into the universities, we'd be, you know, forming that generation that would build popular support. Plus, it would just be like, you know, it's like, you know, people give you a tool when you're in university and you want to use that tool.
Okay. Yeah, when I used to sell electronic publishing software, and one of the things I tried to do there was to persuade the vendor, the producers, to give it away or to sell it at a very, very cheap price to the university community, because if students used the products there, they would use them there. But I mean, do you think from the community point of view, should we be approaching the students or should we be approaching the faculties, or should we be doing both?
Yeah, I don't know how it is at other universities, but Georgia Tech does use it as the introduction to programming.
Right.
So
That's showing up more and more, I think.
yeah, so a lot of the students who work as co-ops for us here already have a little bit of a Python experience. It doesn't necessarily mean that that their next class is ever Python, but
Yeah, right.
you know, it's a
No,
start.
but if they learn programming through Python, then they have an appreciation for the language.
Yeah.
And then when they come across C++, they say, oh, what's all this? No, oh, I'm sorry, I said I wouldn't do that.
But to answer your question, I would definitely go to the faculty
Yeah.
About it because
Yeah, because the
it'll
faculty are
magnify
in
your-
control, and they'll take no notice of what the students tell them they want.
Yeah. I think we tried to do like a programming prize or something like through the university.
A programming prize.
Yeah, sort of.
Yeah,
like
that's something. That's the kind of initiative I do like.
I
So
mean, I'm not so familiar on the university side as to what the best way is, but I think if we could get in the official institutions, like you're saying, get people using it.
good.
So the third
Yep.
thing, which was just a suggestion, is, and I've definitely seen this in a lot of open source communities, that what you mentioned, the lack of leadership. And you also said leadership's hard, and it is. And
Yeah.
it's not necessarily like something a lot of people want to step up to.
You don't say.
And I work with a guy who's in a nonprofit in John Stahl, who I mentioned stealing these slides from.
Yep.
He's very much a community organizer too, and he and I are always scheming about organizing
Mhm.
and leadership kind of things. And for the Get Paid project, I sort of invented a organizing philosophy because it's kind of like the open source project not organized by a developer.
Yeah.
Most of them are very much developer driven. That I call social sourcing. So I'd be glad to send you my slides on that.
Excellent.
Check out
Yes,
this.
I'd like to see them. And I do also think as well it would be useful if the not just, in the same way that the developers of the different products are starting to get together and to talk about common problems. I think it would be useful if foundationally a foundations mailing list of which I'm a member, which isn't terribly coherent, but at least if you've got a problem, then you can say, well, what do you do about it? We had someone mailed a list either late last year or early this, saying our lawyers have just advised us to take the donate button off our website because in order to solicit charitable donations, you have to be registered in every state that you're soliciting donations in. What do you guys do about it? So I wrote back and said, well, our website's in Netherlands, in Holland. So as far as I'm concerned, we're soliciting charitable contributions in Holland. And if people in the United States want to click the button, that's fine. But we're not soliciting in the United States. We're actually soliciting in the Netherlands, and it's just the solicitation is being transmitted. But ultimately, some fairly sensible advice came out, which is, well, hey, dude, if you've got a reasonable-looking website, you look like a charity, it's obvious that nobody's scamming, then nobody's going to come gunning for you in the first place, so get those buttons back on the site. And that probably helped them, because they were seriously worried about the impact that was going to have on their revenues. But thanks, good suggestion. Question?
I'm curious about relationship between Python Foundation and Google. Like one of the things, I think they are doing very good job promoting Python for corporations.
Okay.
I was able to sneak in Python because Google uses it.
Yeah, I think
And
a lot
this
of
is the
people have
only
become
reason
aware
they
of
allow
Python. In fact, I suspect that the big spike in last year's attendance at PyCon was because the conference followed fairly closely upon the announcement of the Google App Engine. And the only language you could use to program the Google App Engine was Python. So a lot of people said to themselves, well, hey, if we've got a chance to get in on the Google infrastructure. But you said you're curious about the relationship between the PSF and Google.
Or
What do you want
plans
to
to
know?
work together against.
Do we work together? No, I mean, we're certainly for them. I mean, Guido van Rossum works for Google and spends, he's allowed to spend half his time on non-Google projects. Most people get 20% time at Google. Guido gets 50% time. So, I mean, and a lot of the people who have been and are involved with the foundation are Google employees, but we have no formal relationship beyond that, other than Google have offered generous sponsorship to Python conferences, to PyCon. And they've been very supportive through their Summer of Code schemes and through the Google SOH. What was that, the GSOH?
G-Hop?
G-Hop rather, yeah, not keep your Google sense of humor, sorry. The highly open participation event that they ran. Both of those events have been highly supportive to Python, although by no means exclusively to Python. So I think Google are a good ambassador for the language. At the moment, we aren't looking to them to be anything more than a good ambassador to the language and supportive of our efforts. Maybe we could expect more, but I don't know really. They're a commercial organization.
One thing
Other question?
One thing that I've just kind of noticed as a tacit observation or whatever is if you look at some of the languages that have become a bit more popular, they've usually had a backing of a larger company, and I think the connection that I've noticed is it seems to be advertising. People are aware of it, therefore because they're aware of it, they use it and they're like, oh, this has credibility because I'm aware of it. And it's almost, that seems to be really the challenge, I think, with the Python community in general, and the language is that there's some people that are aware of it, but there are a lot that aren't, or they're like, oh, this is just some esoteric language.
Yeah.
And
okay, well, I would argue that two things. First of all, my own experience with Sun, being an early employee of Sun Microsystems, I was badge number 1500 and something worldwide. And my own experience of other organizations generally is that any successful advertising campaign takes place once the knee of a growth curve has been reached. So, in other words, advertising is not the means of growth. Advertising is a response to growth. People will spend money on advertising if they realize they can increase their future revenues by investing in the advertising. They will not, generally speaking, advertise speculatively. And there may be Google didn't get famous by advertising, right? Google got famous by providing the best damned search on the web. End of story. So, we haven't got the resources to mount a large advertising campaign. So what we need to do is we need to take a page out of Seth Godin's book. I don't know whether you're familiar with Seth's work. He's a marketer who's been familiar with the tech sphere for a long time. He worked for Yo-Yo Die, and he was a Yahoo, early worker for Yahoo, I think. And I quote his blog quite a lot in various odd snippets that I write in mine. But what we need to engage in is viral marketing. We haven't got the resources to fund a vast advertising or marketing campaign. So what we need to do is we need to work out ways where we can promote from the bottom rather than from the top and build a large community that way.
now, with that being said, though, too, one thing that seemed to be that you say continually is a challenge is finding manpower. And it seems like part of the reason for that seems to be that a lot of people, they need to eat, so to speak, and there's not enough, if there's not any money behind it, they can't afford to just quit their day job to devote a lot of energy.
You see me working right now?
Well, true, but
I have a day job.
yeah. Well, that's understood with that, but I mean, if the organization started to really grow, you would have to, you would need some more resources to probably really grow that.
Well, I'll cross that bridge when I come to it. At the moment, we've got $400,000 that we're hard pressed to spend. It's taken us 3 months to screw up our courage enough to decide, well, we'll spend $100,000 this year and see what changes. So, okay, yes, of course, when we grow the community, there'll be problems. They're the kind of problems I want. There will be problems. I don't deny it. I don't try and gainsay it. There are problems now. I just want to trade the problems I've got now for the problems of leading a larger and more vibrant community, I guess, is all I'm saying. Yes?
Is there any outreach to more of the business community? And the reason I ask this is I had this sort of I've been in jobs where mostly it's been a Microsoft shop, and I have this long-running, or Java for that matter, philosophy that a big part of the reason that Python isn't used is because, and this will sound stupid, it's not hard enough. You got a lot of big egos involved in technology that have got the business community completely snowed into saying, well, it has to be this big. It has to be this complicated. We have to use the big language. We have to use.
We have to have a CIO who gets paid $500,000 a year.
And we have to, and because we are in Java, well, we have to outsource these jobs, and we have to, have 15 developers doing this.
Yeah.
And the reality is that a lot of those things could be done with Python for a lot less, and any arguments about speed and stuff, I mean,
are completely irrelevant in many cases.
especially now with the hardware being as cheap as it is there any real outreach to the business community directly to say, you know what, you're being snowed?
No, the answer is there is no direct outreach to the business community right now.
I'm just saying that would help with the money
about
as well.
2 years, 18 months ago, something like that, we did hire someone for 6 months to act as someone we call, I think, the evangelism coordinator or some such title. Now that resulted in a lot of useful initiatives, but unfortunately nothing that was geared towards the commercial applications of Python. So I think that's an area where we probably do need to focus more attention. Now we've made a start. PyCon sponsorship has gone up from, I think we got maybe $5,000 the first time, and it was in 5 figures. We got over $100,000 last year for PyCon sponsorship. And Van Lindberg, the guy who's taken over the sponsorship recruitment from me because I no longer had time, he's done a terrific job of growing that. I mean, it was him who basically made the jump from 5 figures to 6. I said up into 5 figures, up into 6. So I think when I did, the last conference I did was 2006, and we got like $28,000 into sponsorship. I think Van brought in maybe $106 or $110,000 worth of sponsorship. So there is support for the business community. Now at the moment, the support that we're seeing is mostly from people like the 2 ladies who came in at the start of the meeting. They're interested in recruiting Python talent because it's scarce. But I think we could probably get better support once people realize that Python represented a better solution to their problems.
What I'm thinking about is reaching out to like a Harvard Business Review. I mean, if you can imagine a Harvard Business Review actually doing, you know, a piece about the efficiency of a business, focusing on developing their software needs in Python versus another.
Yeah.
And you can actually, you know, have somebody like that have a Wharton school, any of these big business schools, and actually say, you know, we did it both ways. We looked at 2 different shops. These people were outsourcing these, you know, 1,500 jobs to Java, and these people had 5 guys doing Python. These folks got more done. Reaching out and maybe even sponsoring a study like that, or you know, something like that, reaching out to those business communities might be very useful, because I honestly think that they're open to that, especially with the
That's a great idea. Do you want to lead the charge? Or? Well, you know, seriously, I mean, it's just another thing we should spend time on, but I will definitely make that a higher priority in future, yes.
Well, I think it's also one of the reasons, though, that both IronPython and actually Jython are a very good thing, because it actually allows you to sort of inject Python into this legacy application.
And you can point to having a healthy ecosystem as well. It's not like there's only one implementation.
Exactly.
Yeah.
If I was going to try to sell Python into big business, my #1 tool would be Resolver. Are you familiar with that?
I am. The
That's
IronPython product from Resolver Systems.
That is an unbelievable development, and not only just because it's a product in and of itself, that businesses could see, okay, this is something all based on Python.
Hands up if you've heard of Resolver. Okay, for those of you who haven't, hands up if you know what a spreadsheet is. Okay, well, Resolver is a Python program spreadsheet, but it's not just a Python program spreadsheet. I mean, really, you can do things. It's very easy to use all the Python stuff that we know and love to compute on the spreadsheet. I mean, the most fascinating demonstration I found was where they actually ran a Python program to color the cells of a spreadsheet algorithmically, and basically they then shrunk the spreadsheet until you got 1 pixel per cell, and bingo, you're actually doing bitmap graphics in a spreadsheet. It was really quite amazing. So it's a very, very
if you wanted a 30-minute thing of what I can do with Python that you said earlier, that would be the perfect thing to highlight on the python.org, because everybody who's not really familiar with programming is familiar with the spreadsheets, but it also exposes Python at the same time that you're doing the spreadsheet. It's really just
I would really like to see the Python front page, the python.org front page, highlighting things. I mean, one of the reasons I was a bit depressed about the website was, we had this in 2006. We had this fabulous new design with a spaceman on the front. NASA uses Python. And in 2009, we've got this fabulous design of the space and it doesn't say how. It doesn't tell you what NASA is doing with Python. It just says NASA uses Python. What for? You know, do the cleaners do the janitorial rotation with Python? Well, I mean, I know from my own personal experience, I have personally been responsible for teaching 40 scientists Python at JPL in the past 6 months because they're using Python to support the Mars lander. And Python's not going to Mars, but I've been told if that spaceship doesn't land on Mars, I must never go back to JPL again. So I hope the training was effective. But you know, again, it's like when you're selling things, the mistake that technical people commonly make is to focus on the features and not on the benefits, right? I don't want to know that NASA uses Python. That's a feature of Python. What I want to know is that Python is a really great language for supporting scientific activities that involve reading instruments, storing the results in databases, coordinating that with other experiments, and producing graphical realizations of the results. That is a benefit. Anyway, I was asked to speak for 45 minutes. I assumed that would mean 35 minutes with 10 minutes for questions. So after half an hour of questioning, we've gone slightly over our time. I'm sorry, Brandon, but
I enjoyed it.
I beg your pardon?
I enjoyed it.
Okay, well, I was going to say, if you've enjoyed this half as much as I have, then I guess I've enjoyed it twice as much as you.
Steve Holden,